Hello and welcome to this masterclass on how you paint a Games Workshop Kratos tank. It's a gorgeous tank. I read a lot of stuff online about it not being accurate, how it's got too many guns, but let's face it, this is a universe of absurdity. When putting it together, painting it, I found it being really nice big size. It allows me to do lots of things with it, lots of negative space to exploit. I can put a few details into it. At the very outset of this tutorial series, I want to address some of the most frequently asked questions. I want us to look at the materials we need to gather up before we begin the painting process, and any other bric-a-brac that we may need for this piece. Weathering powder and oils. The weathering powders, unfortunately, are no longer available that I use. Wilder Street Dust, and I'm converting my entire working process over to the Ammo MIG range. It's easy to get, the highest quality you could possibly get, and it's a name that you can trust, a little bit like the Winsor & Newton for oil paint. So everything from here on out, everything that you'll see demonstrated in this video, you can find equivalents in the MIG ammo range. I made sure of that. But weathering powder we'll need to create some really nice weathering effects, especially for those tracks. Oil paint, this is really handy. It's pre-thinned for us, and it comes with this applicator, so you can just smash it straight onto the miniature and away you go. Oil paints, I prefer using these because I get a lot more run time out of them. I can mix these up, I can increase the viscosity, I can reduce the viscosity with how much thinner I add, whereas this is pre-made straight out of the bottle usage. This I find I have a lot more versatility with. I mistakenly said these were Winsor & Newton. Winsor & Newton, Dale Rowney, name brand, can be trusted. I would highly recommend that you buy the artist grade set. Yes, they are more expensive, but I've had this for about 5 years now, and I'm still pretty much nowhere near getting through it. Invest in your equipment where appropriate, and it will last you a lifetime. Sponge for chipping. This isn't the kind of sponge that you wash dishes with. Rather, it's the kind that is foam packed to help protect your miniatures, or that come in Games Workshop packets, Primarks for example. What we can do, rip it up, smoosh it along the edge, create some really nice and extra layer of chipping effects to our vehicle. But this will come into much bigger focus later on. Satin, matte and gloss varnish. The three wise men. Gloss varnish helps protect your paint job while also increasing the capillary action of paint, so it makes things flow into gaps and recesses a little bit easier. Also essential for adding any decals to a project. Matte varnish is great for calming down the gloss varnish and giving a much more muted, natural overall surface. And satin varnish, well, I just like Space Marine armor in satin varnish. I feel that extra little bit of shine helps differentiate it from other textures that might be available on the miniature. Not so much here because it's all metal and tank, but when it comes to infantry, really handy to have. Variety of acrylic paints, all different manufacturers. I don't really need to go into much detail here, as I'll give you the paint recipe during the course of the video, but a good range of acrylic paints from Scale 75, Vallejo, MIG I've been using a lot of recently, having some really good results. Games Workshop, whatever works for you, whatever floats your boat. This is absolutely and utterly essential when it comes to marking out things like the Kratos' pattern, because we are very easily able to cut all manner of designs. This is a piece of sheet metal with indented grooves. So when we take our knife, it follows along the pattern for us, creating some wonderful and accurate geometric shapes for us. Brushes, good old brushes. For the most part, I do tend to use the Redgrass Games dry brush for any weathering that I do, but I also really love just buying really cheap brushes that I give a bad Bart Simpson haircut to. So when we come to weather this, I can drag it down and keep the pattern, develop it. Now this kind of brush will cost you quite a lot of money through other manufacturers, but you can make your own by buying just a very cheap brush and giving it a bad haircut. For the brushes, I very rarely throw a brush away, so I have all manner of different brushes, different coarsenesses. Some have been littered with super glue. Oh, that's a nice brush. I'm going to bring that into my good brush pile. But these brushes do all sorts. A good variety of brushes. We don't particularly need anything like Kolinsky Sable Hair, especially when we start weathering, especially when we start using oils. Any old brushes that you have in your collection will do. Oh! Shout out to those who's been here. If you know, you know. Hairspray. Some people like heavy chipping fluid. I can't say a bad word against it, but I developed my technique using hairspray. It's the first time I read about this technique where you put a layer of hairspray down, add paint on top, reactivate this layer with water on top, and you can chip it to create some very realistic 3D chipping effects. You don't need to buy this particular brand. I should get sponsored by them, really. Tresemme for the best. Yeah, that recommendation's 50p endorsement right there. But if you're looking for hairspray, I normally go for name brands because they're slightly more reliable. You get more bang for your buck overall rather than the cheap stuff. I always go for maximum hold. So if it's on a scale to 1 to 5, always get the 5. 1 to 10, get the strongest one you can. 2 to 3 layers of this stuff is often enough for heavy weathering techniques, but I cannot tell you this enough. Different countries will have different recipes. Different countries, even different states, even different areas within the same country will have different regulations on what you can put in this stuff. So try it first. Don't take my word as gospel. Don't simply just spray this stuff on because I told you to do it twice. Try 2, try 3, try 4 on different swatches to see which kind of chipping that you prefer. Hairdryer, because it speeds up the process. No need to go and buy a Tony and Guy. I bought this for my wife. She didn't like it. A £90 hair dryer. She doesn't like it, so it's become my hairdryer. Files and sanding discs. Now this is where you want to put a little bit of money into it. The files, I cannot recommend anything but the Tamiya files. When you file this over the top, especially new, they do wear out after about 6 months hard usage. When you file over the top, it almost creates a polished sheen to the plastic or the metal that you're filing over. These are by far and away the best files I've ever used, and I cannot sing their praises enough. Sanding files, I found these on Amazon quite cheaply. They come in different grits. So what's this? 009. I think the higher number is the higher grit size to them. So we have a 5000, so it barely feels like anything. It's a very fine, smooth finish. So you start with the coarser grit, end up with a finer grit. I normally linger around this 009. I find this does the job for me. So for example, like if I'm filing down a base, pop that over the top, have a coarser grit to start with, and then I can polish it off with that to give me a mirror sheen. We need sharp knives and clippers. Now the clippers aren't the best in the world that I own. I don't really feel like I need ultra fine clippers. I don't want to put a lot of expense in them. I don't want to spend a lot of money on them. I may think differently if I try some of the God Hand ones, which I believe are like $60. But I can always clip it off, run a sharp blade over the top, and you know it's done. I don't feel like I need to spend a lot on these materials. I bought this at a Hobbycraft. I can't remember exactly where. The handle doesn't really matter whatsoever. If it feels comfortable, great. What the hell is that? What is the most important are the blades themselves. Now if you want the tippity top, Swan Morton have the highest grade sharpness, but again I don't really feel like I need that ultra precision. I bought these on Amazon because they're a next day delivery and they do the job for me. They don't last very long, but neither do the Swan Morton. So, sharp blades, clippers. Putty. We can use a combination of green stuff. I really like using Magisculpt resin and hardener because it gives me the kind of subtlety and suppleness of mixing together milliput and green stuff. But this stuff is absolutely essential in our building process. Any awkward joins, anything that doesn't quite fit together, any hard areas that we need to put together, this stuff comes in because it can be sanded to a very, very fine, hard finish. So just take the standard stuff, milliput standard, this green stuff, you're sorted. Oh, and of course, what the hell am I saying? You need sculpting tools to go alongside it. So I bought a set off Amazon. But you can find these on Green Stuff World and on PK Pro as well. While not essential, it's still very nice to have the Redgrass Games glass palette for oil paints. It allows me to mix and match on the surface of the miniature, on the surface of here, to transfer it onto the miniature. Now when it comes to oil painting, mixing on your palette will comprise 90% of the work that you'll do. You get it right on the palette, it will work on the miniature. So having this, while not essential by any means, it's a very, very handy, nice thing to have, especially if you are more interested in painting vehicles or Titans or Thunderhawks, which we could be painting in the very near future. Again, not essential, but oh boy are they so nice to have, so handy. So these are makeup palettes that you could buy off Amazon very, very cheaply. I think all of these cost me like £4 including shipping. You can mix and match outside your palette, you can get it dirty. These need a wash, I'll be putting them in the wash after this. But very, very handy things to have in your arsenal. And that is it for equipment that we'll need, and extra nice little equipment that we may want for our Kratos. Now let's go on to building the thing, shall we? To start with, glue. Seems super obvious, but it's worth reviewing. I bought army painted glue. It's the only thing in the store that I had, so I ran with it. It sticks things together. I generally tend to stick things together with super glue, purely because I do like the brittle nature of it. I do like it dries very quickly. So I'll put the tank together primarily with super glue. Then I'll seal any awkward areas, such as any joins that you'll see. Let me zoom in. So these are two pieces on the tank. So in order to give that smooth finish, I'll take some liquid cement, pass over the top, and then sand over the top of it to give me that smooth finish. I would highly recommend Tamiya extra thin cement, and any cement that they do have. It comes with this really nice applicator, and like all Tamiya products, it's just top of the shelf. But failing that, good old-fashioned Games Workshop plastic glue will do the trick for you as well. A set of micro screws are also essential for this kind of work, to create battle damage or just to drill out vents, which I rather mistakenly do later on in the video. Let's paint a Kratos. I canvassed the Discord for any questions people had when it came to modelling, painting vehicles, and these are the reoccurring ones that popped up. So what parts should be in subassembly? How do I know? And this is a question I think people are far too hung up about. You worry about it far too much. As a rule of thumb, build to completion as much as possible. This will ensure that all our highlights and shadows are consistent across the entire miniature. There is nothing worse than working on a cloak that's separate from the miniature, and when you apply it on there, the lights don't quite match up. It's infuriating, so build as much as possible. I tend to leave things like smokestacks separate, as I find it awkward getting in between the barrels of the brush afterward. And when you look at the miniature, try and imagine if you would have any difficulties getting the airbrush into those areas. And I know it's a little bit of a cop-out question, or a little bit of a cop-out answer rather, because unless you've built the vehicle firsthand, you don't necessarily know which bits are awkward, but some are pretty self-evident. The inside of a Spartan, for example, it's well worth painting that up first in the sub-assembly before assembling the vehicle. That is straightforward, that's a little bit more common sense. But ultimately, this question needs to be answered person to person. There's no rule handed down from on high over how many sub-assemblies you must go through. If, like me, you prefer the model in front of you and build as much as possible, great. I find I lose a lot less bits doing that. I find it a lot less finicky during the painting process. However, if you do like building a lot of individualized pieces and have them all on sticks or corks, then by all means do so. Go with the flow, go with what feels natural. Rather than sticking with a generalized rule, go with what feels instinctive for you. The entire miniature was clipped from the sprues, read the instructions. There's a little bit of a flex in this video because I have my Horus Aximand, which is available right now, by the way, and it is linked on the website. So if you want a little Christmas treat for yourself, well, it is ready and raring to go. I assembled the entire thing with super glue, glue it all together to give me that rigidity and that fast gluing motion. I even assembled the tracks. Tracks are one of those things that I see a lot of people painting separately, and again, that's great. I am not here to contradict your working process, not at all. However, when you assemble this, they fit quite snugly in the gap, so I don't necessarily want to pre-assemble or pre-paint the tracks before applying onto the miniature. When I start lathering weathering powder and stuff like that on top, it does give me a much more natural overspill onto the paint job itself. So all parts were clipped using my cheap and cheerful clipper, run a blade across the top to remove, and then I go in with a 009 grit sanding pad to make sure that there is just nothing left on there. If there are any visible surfaces that need to be filed down, I'll use a higher grit to give me a smoother. With the tracks, what I found is that they need to be placed over like so. And what we may find is that we'll have a hard time getting into these nooks and crannies. So I'm going to take a little bit of black primer right now, just paint over the top. If you have an airbrush, you can certainly do this, but I don't want to have to load my airbrush up just for this portion. Another thing we can do, which I'll be doing with the other section, is airbrushing black primer on the inside before we apply the tracks, because the inside here might be a little bit difficult to get to completely. So design note 1, undercoat these portions of the miniature. Now we've drilled all the barrels out. In order to seal them, I take a little bit of Tamiya clear cement, drain off excess, and I just want to roll this on the inside of these, just to make sure there's no missing flash or anything unusual there. I can also help the cleaning process by adding a layer over the top, and this will just help melt that seam mark a little bit. I can do the same down here, and I can take my filing sticks, 400 grit, then 800 grit, file over the top, and we should end up with something like this. So there's no mark whatsoever. There is a mark towards the top, so we will need to fill that with Milliput. The gaps in the Kratos have proven a little bit harder to get rid of, so we've mixed together. All this is Milliput. We're going to mix it up with some isopropyl alcohol to create sort of a soup consistency. And the aim with this soup is to take it and then roll it into the gap. So I'm going to do this with each of the gaps. and once it dries, it'll dry really hard and really brittle, so we're able to file over the top. So I'm going to do this with each of them, come back and file them. It wasn't a mistake. I knew all along what the hell it was I'm doing. Yes, I know how exhaust fan works. Okay, so this wasn't a smokestack, as I first thought. Instead, this is something to stop you burning your hands. So it needs to be solid on the inside. So I drilled all that out for essentially nothing. Great. Okay, so I needed a way to fill it back in. Thank you, Fred and Flo, for 300 cotton buds. What I was able to do, cut this bad boy, thread it through, and it just so happened, oh, look at this, threads through perfectly. Oh my gosh. Okay, gonna give this a slight squeeze so I know where to cut underneath it. Take a pair of tweezers. You even have a hole. I think there's a hole there, probably isn't. Add a little bit of glue. And look at that, ultra detailing on your smokestacks that I 100% meant to do. Oh no. Now I could act like that was the plan all along. Hyper detailing. I'm going to sell it like that on the thumbnail as well. Ha ha ha. It's really true what they say about this machine. You don't really need to magnetize anything. So with these, don't glue any guns in because they just pop in and out really, really snugly. So I'll pop this in here. Oh, I mean, it's so snug, it barely even fits. Okay, that's a bad example. Let's go with the last cannon. Yeah, it just fits in. All fine, yeah, no need to magnetize. Awesome. Come on, you. Ah, cool. Don't glue these bits so they can revolve and spin around. And we have a pretty cool tank. Question number 2. Pre-shading. Highlighting a vehicle. Why are the shadows upside down? So this is a common misconception, a common problem with the understanding of how light and shadow works depending on the surface we're dealing with. But ultimately the question boils down to, why do we highlight the vehicle in the way that we do? For the most part, in Little Legend, we like to do a technique called panel modulation. So you can see with this student work produced from one of the Infantry and Tanks weekend workshops, and we are bringing it out to Canada in January. Tickets are still available if you watch it in time. You'll see that the very top highlights, the lightest portion of the vehicle, sits right at the very top. And then that's directly contrasted with the darkest point of shadow on the side of the vehicle. So panel modulation is contrasting values, certainly, but it's placing the highest point of light up against the darkest point of shadow. Why do we do this? Well, because it looks really cool, in my opinion, and it's very eye-catching. It's a very stylistic choice. By placing the darkest shadows against the brightest highlight, we increase the readability of the model. But is it the most realistic of finishes? Well, you'd be surprised. When we look at this car, we can see that the highest point of light sits on the very top of the engine, and then on the side we have the darkest point. This would seem to contradict a zenithal highlight where light hits at the top and develops into shadow. However, we need to consider the material and the light source itself. Light hits it from above, and as it curves around the vehicle, well, it doesn't hit against the very top area. Instead, it slides down, so our lightest point on the side of this vehicle is actually reflected light from the ground, from its surroundings, and the shadow sits right up the very top next to our highest point. So in effect it is realistic, but it's realistic with a high shine, high glossy carbon framework for the car. Here's my rough drawing. I pay a full license for Photoshop and I use it with the same finesse as MS Paint. but this is my crude drawing of where you look to place your shadows and highlights on an ultramarine vehicle. Now you paint ultramarines with a black base coat, you build up with white pre-shade, and then you add layers of blue on the top. You can find the full video tutorial for this recipe on Little Legends Studio via the Patreon. It's all there, nice big whack of tutorials, including a PDF tutorial. But this is the scheme, this is the highlighting principle that we want to stick to with our vehicles. Panel highlighting. Now if you did want more information on the subject beyond Little Legends Studio, well, the absolute granddaddy of this line of thinking is Mig Jimenez, and you can find the book Modulation and Techniques. It's what all other modulation techniques are derived from, and I cannot recommend this book enough. Colour modulation is great for the more polished legions, Emperor's Children, Blood Angels. I use them on my Sons of Horus. However, you may want to consider a straight up zenithal highlight for legions like the Death Guard, the Space Wolves. Paint schemes are a little bit more grounded and the armour isn't as polished. We need to consider the lighting direction, we need to consider the materials and the upkeep that they will go through. Ultimately, it's a stylistic choice. There is no right or wrong answer, but we need to be consistent across the entirety of the force by understanding the difference between colour modulation, zenithal highlighting, illumination by panels and spotlight technique. We can carry this right the way throughout the force. It's this, starting the Kratos. So I built it and coated it black. Scale Sanctified Black Primer. Next thing we need to do is add decayed metal across everything. This will be a Sons of Horus vehicle, believe it or not. This will be the under chipping. So this layer, we're not going to see 99.9% of it. So it doesn't even need to be that consistent of a coverage. Because what we'll do is put a layer of hairspray over the top, and then we'll activate it after we've airbrushed all our Sons of Horus colours and chip it away to create some realistic chipping. We are going to stop the video there. Once we have put down our metallic base coat, we will be going on to using heavy chipping materials next. So we need to end it here. If you need to go out and buy any hairspray, heavy chipping effects, by all means go do so. In the description below there'll be a full list of links to materials used during the process, not only of this video but the masterclass in its entirety. A note on this metallic pre-shade. Okay, so if we are dealing with Thousand Suns, you do not want to add any chipping materials, because once we put the candy coat on top, we lose the effect. It's ineffectual, so do not do it for that. For all the other legions, by all means you can go ahead and do this. When it comes to Blood Angels, I would recommend a dark grey metallic coat, or hell, just a dark grey coat. That way, when we add the red on top and begin the chipping process, well, it ends up with a dark grey coming out underneath rather than the metallic. So legion dependent will determine what base coat we apply to our miniature. If we are using a red legion, or if we're painting a red legion, use dark grey. Everything else we can use a burnt orange / decayed metal, and then we're good to go. So in the next video we'll be base coating our miniature with a hairspray. We'll be base coating the miniature with heavy chipping fluid if you prefer, and we'll be going on to the painting proper. I hope you've enjoyed this primer on how to get started with your own vehicle, and it's a way into developing your sense of how to paint vehicles to a professional standard. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you in the next vid.